Nobody wants to think about it. But people who lived through the Second World War, the siege of Sarajevo, and the collapse of Venezuela all said the same thing afterward. They wished they had prepared sooner. Here are 17 must-have foods to stockpile if you want to survive WW3. Food 17, white rice. White rice is the most calorie-dense, shelf-stable, affordable staple food on the planet. A 50-pound bag of long-grain white rice costs between $20 and $30 at most warehouse stores and provides approximately 80,000 calories, enough to sustain one adult for 40 days at 2,000 calories per day. It requires nothing but water and heat to prepare, stores for 20 to 30 years in a sealed, oxygen-free container, and is accepted as a staple food in more cultures than any other single grain. Brown rice, nutritionally superior, is frequently recommended by health-minded preppers as an alternative. The problem is shelf life. Brown rice contains oils in the bran layer that go rancid within 6 to 12 months under ordinary storage conditions. White rice, with the bran removed, stores for decades. In a long-duration emergency where you're actually eating your stockpile, white rice is the correct choice. Nutritional completeness comes from the other 16 items on this list. The storage method matters as much as the selection. White rice stored in its original paper or plastic packaging degrades significantly faster than rice stored in sealed mylar bags with oxygen absorbers inside food-grade buckets. The oxygen absorbers remove the atmospheric oxygen that drives oxidation and insect survival. Even microscopic grain weevil eggs that survive in commercially packaged rice are killed in an oxygen-free environment. Rice stored this way in a cool, dark location can genuinely achieve the 25 to 30-year shelf life figures that are sometimes cited with appropriate skepticism. The material cost of a mylar bag and an oxygen absorber is under $2 per bucket. The civilizations that built their food security around rice, Japan, China, Korea, most of Southeast Asia, had populations that understood intuitively what modern preppers sometimes argue about. Caloric reliability first, nutritional completeness second. You don't survive a siege on quinoa. Food 16, dried beans and legumes. Beans complete the rice equation. Together, rice and beans provide a complementary amino acid profile that approaches complete protein, a nutritional fact that every food culture that relied on plant-based subsistence discovered independently. The combination of lysine-rich beans with methionine-rich rice covers the primary protein deficiencies of each grain alone, which is why rice and beans in some form appears in the traditional diets of populations across Latin America, West Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Dried beans, pinto, black, navy, kidney, chickpeas, lentils, store for 25 to 30 years in sealed conditions. They're inexpensive, nutritionally dense, high in fiber, iron, potassium, folate, and protein, and require nothing but soaking and cooking. Lentils are particularly practical because they don't require soaking. They cook in 20 to 30 minutes, reducing fuel consumption compared to whole beans, which can take 2 hours of simmering. A 30-pound supply of mixed dried legumes provides roughly 45,000 calories and approximately 3,000 grams of protein. Stored alongside rice in sealed containers, this combination forms the nutritional backbone of a sustainable emergency food supply. The cost, under $40 for a 30-pound mixed supply, makes the rice and bean foundation the highest value preparedness purchase available. Food 15, rolled oats. Oats are the most practical breakfast and calorie delivery mechanism in any extended emergency situation. They cook in 5 minutes, require nothing but hot water, and provide roughly 150 calories per half cup dry, a complete breakfast from a single component. A 50-pound bag of rolled oats costs around $40 and provides approximately 75,000 calories, making oats competitive with rice on a calories per dollar basis. The nutritional profile of oats extends beyond calories. They're high in beta-glucan fiber, which supports immune function and cardiovascular health. They contain meaningful quantities of iron, magnesium, and B vitamins. They're among the highest protein grains available at approximately 17 grams of protein per 100 grams dry weight. Rolled oats store for 3 to 5 years in original packaging and significantly longer, 8 to 10 years, when repackaged in sealed mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. The short cook time is not a minor convenience. In a fuel-limited scenario where every unit of energy used for cooking is energy that has to be sourced and stored, The difference between a 5-minute oatmeal and a 45-minute pot of dried beans is meaningful at scale. Rotate them into your normal breakfast routine, and the supply essentially manages itself. Food 14. Honey. Honey is the only food that doesn't expire. Archaeological evidence from Egyptian tombs has confirmed honey more than 3,000 years old that was still perfectly edible. The antimicrobial properties that make this possible, low moisture content, acidic pH, and the hydrogen peroxide produced by the enzyme glucose oxidase, also make honey useful as a wound dressing, a throat coating for illness, and a sweetener that provides quick-release energy when refined sugar supplies are unavailable. Raw, unprocessed honey additionally contains trace amounts of pollen, enzymes, and antioxidants that processed commercial honey loses through heating. In a long-duration emergency where immune function matters and variety in the diet is limited, the minor benefits of raw honey over processed honey are worth having. From a storage standpoint, honey requires nothing except a sealed container kept away from moisture. It will crystallize over time, which is a physical change, not spoilage, and is reversed by gentle warming. A year's supply of honey for a family of 4, roughly 20 to 30 pounds, costs around $60 to $100 from a bulk supplier or local beekeeper and never requires rotation. That last point is worth emphasizing. Most preparedness supplies require monitoring, rotation, and eventual replacement. Honey requires none of those things. Food 13. Salt. Salt is not just a seasoning. In a world without refrigeration, which is a feature of any extended grid-down emergency, salt is food preservation technology. Curing and brining meat requires salt. Making fermented vegetables, which provide probiotics and vitamins through winter, requires salt. Maintaining electrolyte balance during physical stress and dehydration requires salt. The body cannot produce sodium independently, and sodium deficiency produces symptoms, cramps, confusion, weakness, that compound the other stresses of an emergency situation. The Roman army paid soldiers partly in salt, the origin of the word salary, because commanders understood that without salt, armies stopped functioning. Medieval European salt taxes were among the most contested political issues of the era, precisely because everyone needed it and the supply was controlled. Gandhi's 1930 Salt March was specifically a protest against British salt taxation in India, because salt was that important to ordinary survival. Non-iodized salt in 50-pound bags costs under $20 and stores indefinitely when kept dry. Iodized salt is preferable if iodine from seafood and dairy won't be available in the diet, since iodine deficiency causes thyroid dysfunction over extended periods. A 50-pound bag of salt takes up the space of a large dictionary and is the single highest value preparedness purchase per dollar on this list. One bag of salt represents more practical food security per dollar than almost any other single purchase on this entire list. Food 12. White sugar. Sugar's shelf life, like honey's, is essentially indefinite when kept dry. Granulated white sugar sealed in airtight containers doesn't spoil. The low moisture content prevents bacterial and mold growth. It's pure caloric fuel, providing 4 calories per gram with no nutritional complexity, which is exactly what it needs to be in a high-exertion emergency scenario, where caloric deficit is the primary metabolic threat. Beyond direct consumption, sugar is a food preservation aid. Jams, preserves, and canned fruits use sugar as a preservative that allows shelf stability without refrigeration. In a post-emergency household that's managing food from a garden or foraged sources, the ability to make preserved spreads and syrups extends the usable life of perishable foods significantly. Brown sugar, powdered sugar, and sugar alternatives have shorter shelf lives due to moisture content and additive oils. Plain granulated white sugar is the correct choice for long-term storage. A 50-pound bag costs roughly $30 and represents 90,000 calories. Stored, stable, indefinite. In a situation where every calorie matters, that's not optional inventory. Combined with honey, it provides the full range of sweetener and preservative capacity a household needs without refrigeration. Food 11. Canned meat, tuna, chicken, and salmon. The protein situation in an extended emergency without hunting, fishing, or livestock access becomes a genuine nutritional problem without stored animal protein. Canned tuna, chicken, and salmon provide complete protein with all essential amino acids at a cost and shelf life that make them the most practical animal protein storage option available. Canned fish additionally provides omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, that plant-based protein sources don't contain. These fatty acids support brain function, cardiovascular health, and inflammation control in ways that are not easily substituted. In a long-duration scenario where cognitive clarity matters, and it matters enormously in a survival context, the neurological support from omega-3s is not trivial. A standard 5-ounce can of tuna provides approximately 25 grams of protein and 130 calories. At the lower end of canned food pricing, around $1 per can, that's protein comparable to or cheaper than fresh chicken per gram, with a shelf life of 3 to 5 years and no refrigeration requirement. A case of 24 cans costs around $20 to $25 and provides 600 grams of protein, a month's worth of supplemental protein for one person at recommended levels. Rotate through it regularly in normal use, and it essentially manages itself. Food 10. Canned vegetables and fruits. Fresh produce disappears from any disrupted food system within days. Canned vegetables and fruits provide the vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber that a rice and beans diet cannot supply alone, and they store for 3 to 5 years under normal conditions, significantly longer when stored cool and dark. The specific nutritional value of canned produce varies with the vegetable and the canning process, but the differences from fresh are often overstated. Many vegetables retain the majority of their nutritional value through canning. Tomatoes specifically become more nutritionally valuable when cooked and canned. The lycopene in tomatoes becomes more bioavailable after heat processing, a fact confirmed by multiple clinical nutrition studies. Vitamin C is the nutrient most affected by canning and long-term storage, which is why including canned fruits, citrus, tomatoes, pineapple, alongside vegetables matters. Scurvy, the vitamin C deficiency disease, was a documented problem in populations cut off from fresh produce in historical siege and survival scenarios. It begins causing symptoms: fatigue, joint pain, bleeding gums, within a month of complete vitamin C deficiency. A stock of canned citrus fruits is cheap insurance against an entirely preventable and historically documented emergency nutrition problem. Food 9. Cooking oil. Fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient available, 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram for both protein and carbohydrate. In a high physical demand emergency scenario where caloric requirements are elevated, fat is the most efficient caloric supplement available by weight. Cooking oil also makes the rest of the stockpile palatable. Rice boiled in water is caloric and edible. Rice cooked with a small amount of oil has significantly better texture and flavor, which matters for morale and for actually eating adequate quantities rather than rationing below caloric needs because the food is unappetizing. Refined coconut oil has the longest shelf life of common cooking oils, 2 to 5 years unopened, due to its high saturated fat content that resists oxidation. Olive oil stores well for 1 to 2 years and provides cardiovascular health benefits. Ghee, clarified butter with the milk solids removed, stores at room temperature for 1 to 2 years and has a rich flavor profile that significantly improves the palatability of basic staple cooking. Vegetable and canola oils are less expensive and store reasonably well, but are more prone to oxidation and rancidity than their more saturated alternatives. For long-term storage, coconut oil or ghee in sealed containers represents the best combination of shelf life and caloric density. A gallon of coconut oil provides approximately 30,000 calories and costs around $30 to $40, one of the better calorie per dollar ratios on this list. Food 8. Dried pasta. Pasta is frequently overlooked in survival food lists in favor of rice and beans, which is a mistake. Dried pasta stores for 2 years in original packaging and up to 30 years in sealed mylar with oxygen absorbers. It cooks in 8 to 12 minutes, making it a fuel-efficient option. It provides approximately 350 calories per 100 grams dry weight and serves as a versatile base for any sauce or protein component available. The variety available in pasta, different shapes, sizes, and formulations, also provides the dietary variety that matters psychologically in an extended emergency. Eating the same food 3 times daily for weeks is a documented morale problem in survival context. Having rice, oats, and pasta as rotating grain staples provides enough variety to maintain willingness to eat adequate quantities rather than rationing out of food fatigue. Pasta is also among the most universally accepted comfort foods, and in a prolonged crisis, the psychological comfort of a familiar meal has documented effects on morale and decision-making quality. Whole wheat pasta offers marginally better nutritional content, but shorter shelf life due to the oils in the bran. For long-term storage, standard semolina pasta in sealed containers is the practical choice. Food 7. Baking soda and baking powder. These two items might seem minor compared to the caloric heavyweights on this list, but their function is disproportionate. The ability to bake bread, pancakes, biscuits, and other leavened foods from basic ingredients transforms a survival diet from a monotonous calorie delivery system into something resembling actual cooking. That distinction matters enormously for morale in extended emergency situations. Baking soda stores indefinitely when kept dry and sealed. Baking powder has a shelf life of 1 to 2 years. It contains baking soda plus a dry acid that can be tested for effectiveness by adding a teaspoon to hot water, which should produce vigorous bubbling if still active. Cream of tartar, which can substitute for the acid in baking powder when combined with baking soda, stores essentially indefinitely and is worth including alongside the baking soda. A 5-pound bag of baking soda costs around $4 and will produce hundreds of batches of baked goods. Stored alongside flour, which stores for 1 year in original packaging and up to 10 years in sealed mylar, baking soda turns a caloric staple into the foundation of bread production. In a scenario where everyone around you is eating plain boiled rice and beans and you're producing fresh biscuits from your stored flour and baking powder, the morale value, your own and your family's, is incalculable. It's also a genuine barter asset. Freshly baked bread in a collapsed food system is not a minor commodity. Food 6. Powdered milk and dairy alternatives. Calcium and vitamin D are nutrients that an emergency diet based primarily on grains and legumes will be deficient in unless specifically addressed. Powdered whole milk, stored in sealed containers, provides both, as well as significant protein and fat, with a shelf life of 2 to 5 years for standard powdered milk and up to 25 years for freeze-dried whole milk powder. For adults who don't consume dairy, calcium sources in long-term food storage are limited. Canned white beans and canned salmon with bones are meaningful non-dairy calcium sources. Vitamin D, produced by sun exposure and found in fatty fish and fortified dairy, is harder to substitute. A supply of vitamin D supplements alongside the food stockpile addresses this gap directly. Powdered milk also functions as a baking ingredient, a thickener, and a way to make cooked grain dishes, oatmeal, rice pudding, significantly more nutritionally complete and calorie-dense. A 5-pound can of powdered whole milk costs around $30 and provides substantial nutritional utility relative to storage space. For households with young children, powdered milk is not optional. It addresses protein, calcium, and caloric density, needs that are difficult to meet through other stored foods, and its shelf life of 2 to 5 years is long enough to be practical without requiring intensive rotation. Food 5. Multivitamins. Multivitamins aren't food, technically, but they belong on this list because they address the nutritional gaps that a stockpiled diet, however well designed, will inevitably have. Fresh produce provides vitamins that store badly or not at all. Variety ensures the broad range of micronutrients the body needs. A survival diet based on stored staples is necessarily narrower than normal, and that narrowing creates micronutrient deficiency risks over extended periods. The historical record on this is clear. Scurvy from vitamin C deficiency, beriberi from thiamine deficiency, pellagra from niacin deficiency, and rickets from vitamin D deficiency all appear consistently in historical populations under dietary restriction. All of them are prevented by a daily multivitamin costing pennies per day. A year's supply of multivitamins for a family of 4 costs around $50 to $100 and takes up roughly the same shelf space as a shoebox. The cost-to-benefit ratio is the best on this entire list. It's also worth including vitamin C supplements specifically, at pennies per tablet, as a dedicated line item, given how consistently and predictably vitamin C deficiency appears in historical emergency diet scenarios. Food 4. Freeze-dried fruits and vegetables. Freeze-drying removes approximately 98% of a food's moisture while preserving nutritional content and flavor far better than conventional canning or dehydration. The result is a shelf life of 25 to 30 years for most produce, with nutritional content that more closely approximates fresh than any other preservation method. Freeze-dried strawberries, blueberries, spinach, peas, corn, and dozens of other produce items are available in sealed cans from emergency food suppliers. They reconstitute with water in minutes and are also edible in their dry state as snacks. The primary limitation is cost. Freeze-dried produce is significantly more expensive per serving than canned alternatives, but the shelf life and nutritional quality justify the price for core items like vegetables and fruits that are otherwise difficult to store for the long term. Mountain House, Augustin Farms, and Thrive Life are among the established freeze-dried food brands with documented long-term storage performance. Purchasing a selection of freeze-dried vegetables and fruits in sealed cans for around $100 to $200 adds a significant nutritional layer to any stored food supply. The freeze-dried format also opens up produce categories that don't survive conventional canning well. Delicate berries, for example, retain far more of their vitamin and antioxidant content freeze-dried than canned. For households with specific nutrient needs or dietary preferences that make the canned vegetable list insufficient, the freeze-dried category provides flexibility that no other preservation method can match at equivalent shelf life. It's the most expensive category on this list per calorie, and the most justifiable for that reason. It covers the nutritional gaps that everything cheaper on the list leaves open. Food 3. Coffee and tea. This is where someone might argue that coffee and tea aren't survival foods and don't belong on a serious stockpile list. That person has never managed a household through an extended emergency. Caffeine dependency is real, and caffeine withdrawal, headaches, fatigue, cognitive impairment, compounds every other difficulty of an emergency situation in ways that are both medically documented and practically obvious to anyone who's tried to function without their morning coffee. Beyond the dependency management, coffee and tea serve as barter currency in extended crisis scenarios with documented historical precedent. During the post-World War II occupation of Germany, American cigarettes and coffee circulated as de facto currency when the Reichsmark had become worthless. During the siege of Sarajevo from 1992 to 1996, one of the longest sieges of a capital city in the history of modern warfare, coffee was among the items residents reported trading most actively when city supply chains collapsed. Whole coffee beans sealed in an airtight container retain quality for 1 to 2 years. Green, unroasted coffee beans store for 2 to 5 years. Instant coffee stores for 20 to 25 years in sealed containers and is the most practical long-term option, despite the obvious quality comparison with fresh brewed. Loose-leaf tea in sealed tins stores for 3 to 5 years. A year's supply of both costs under $50 and represents one of the more psychologically valuable items in any emergency stockpile. The barter dimension of coffee and tea shouldn't be dismissed as secondary. In a disrupted economy, items with high subjective value and no substitute are precisely what currency looks like. The person who controls a supply of coffee in a community that has run out of it is not just comfortable, they are liquid. They can trade for things they need from people who have them, because everyone with a caffeine habit and no coffee is highly motivated to negotiate. Food 2. Hard alcohol. Hard alcohol at 40% alcohol content or higher doesn't expire and serves several functions in an extended emergency that make it valuable far beyond any drinking purpose. As a disinfectant, high-proof spirits applied to wounds and surfaces kill bacteria effectively. As a barter item, it has documented currency value in essentially every documented collapse scenario. As a medicinal adjunct, it was used for centuries as an anesthetic, a sleep aid, and a fever management tool before pharmaceutical alternatives existed. The siege of Sarajevo specifically documented alcohol as a primary barter commodity alongside food and cigarettes. Post-Hurricane Katrina, reporting from New Orleans, included accounts of alcohol serving as a barter medium before normal commerce resumed. The Soviet collapse of the early 1990s produced an entire literature of vodka as currency that reflects a pattern consistent across collapse scenarios. People trade for things they want, and alcohol is reliably wanted. Small sealed bottles, airline-size miniatures, are particularly practical for barter because they represent a consistent unit of value. A collection of sealed factory original spirits represents a barter portfolio that requires no refrigeration, no maintenance, and no special storage beyond staying sealed and cool. The medical utility of hard alcohol deserves more than a passing mention. Before anesthesia, before pharmaceutical antiseptics, and before antibiotics, high-proof spirits were the available intervention for wound cleaning, fever management, and pain control in field conditions. They aren't adequate substitutes for modern medicine. Nobody should be under the impression that vodka on a wound is equivalent to a sterile field and proper antibiotics. But in a scenario where none of those things are available, high-proof alcohol on a wound is genuinely better than nothing, and the historical record of military medicine before the 20th century demonstrates this consistently. Food 1. Water purification supplies, and why they outrank all food. Water earns the first position on this list, not because it's a food, but because without it, the other 16 items become irrelevant within 3 to 4 days. Clean water production capability, water purification tablets, quality filtration equipment, and stored water is the foundational layer beneath any food stockpile. The simplest and cheapest water purification option is unscented household bleach at 6 to 8.25% sodium hypochlorite at 8 drops per gallon of clear water and 16 drops for cloudy water. A $2 bottle treats hundreds of gallons. Hollow fiber filters, the Sawyer Squeeze and similar designs, filter approximately 100,000 gallons over their lifespan at under $40. A gravity-fed ceramic filter handles household volume without pumping. Former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate stated plainly, "If there is one thing that makes the difference between a disaster and a catastrophe, it's water." Stored water requires a minimum of 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and basic sanitation. 2 gallons per day is more realistic when cooking, food preparation, and basic hygiene are factored in. A household of 4 people needs 56 gallons for a 2-week baseline, approximately 2 standard 55-gallon blue barrels, which cost about $30 to $60 each and last indefinitely when treated with a small amount of bleach. The water storage is not separate from the food stockpile. It is the foundation on which the food stockpile functions. The food stockpile described across these 17 items costs between $200 and $500 to assemble at a scale adequate for 1 adult for 1 year, depending on quantity and brand choices. That number is lower than most people's monthly restaurant spending. In the historical context of what populations cut off from food supply systems have faced, the siege of Leningrad from 1941 to 1944, where 800,000 civilians died partly from starvation, the siege of Sarajevo from 1992 to 1996, or Venezuela's ongoing food security collapse, the argument against spending that amount is difficult to make seriously. Preparedness is not a personality type or a political stance. It's a decision about whether to have options when options become scarce. Every item on this list was chosen because it met 3 criteria. It stores, it nourishes, and it performs when the normal food system stops. That's a lower bar than most people set for the other decisions they make every day. If this video gave you a practical starting point for food security, hit the like button. It helps more people find this content. And subscribe to the channel for more straightforward preparedness information that's actually built on historical reality.